To come out of the closet is to bare oneself to the fragility of trust and mercy. Unfortunately, it can mean the difference between life and death for many queer folk, sometimes self-inflicted and always externally wrought. It's been estimated that 40% of trans people will attempt suicide in their lifetime. What is the correlation between this statistic and the discrimination that persists in the pockets of modern America? The often hereditary nature of transphobia and homophobia means it can be difficult to simply unlearn their influence in one's community. Recently, clashes between religious freedom and LGBTQ+ rights have been making the news. While some religious people may argue that the First Amendment protects their right, for example, to refuse to bake a cake for a same-sex wedding, some queer folk would call that an infringement on their rights. Where must we draw the line? Explicitly, the First Amendment states that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof. This vague passage leaves room for wild variance in its practical application. In a memo from the Office of the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions wrote that the First Amendment, quote, protects not just the right to believe or the right to worship. It protects the right to perform or abstain from performing certain physical acts in accordance with one's beliefs, end quote. Jennifer Kent is the managing attorney at Free State Justice, a legal advocacy organization that seeks to improve the lives of low-income LGBTQ+ Marylanders.
You know, when we talk about the First Amendment, there's really two components to it. There's the freedom, the free exercise clause. So when we're talking about the First Amendment in relation to religion, there's the free exercise clause, which is like, hey, I'm here, you know, like I should be allowed to practice my religion in any way that I want. So we give, again, when you're dealing with a religious institution or a religious organization and its internal dynamics, that, you know, you're in pure, that's where the free exercise clause is strongest. The other thing is the establishment clause, which prohibits the establishment, it's a separation of church and state. So those two clauses can somewhat be a little bit in tension with one another, right?
With the 2015 marriage equality ruling, many conservative businesses and schools are justifying their discrimination towards queer people with the idea that they are merely exercising their freedom of religion under the First Amendment.
It's not just, okay, I can't buy a cake, for instance. I mean, we have a client who went into a place of business. He went into a restaurant, and they started calling him the F word, and it was terrible. He left. It was, you know, there's real trauma there. You know, there's stories that were submitted to the Supreme Court as part of the Masterpiece Cake thing, where, you know, you have doctors who are turning away children because they don't want to treat the mothers, you know. So there's real consequences to that the First Amendment does not protect. The First Amendment on any level, either for artistic expression or for religious expression, doesn't protect your right to do that.
According to Lisa Crooms, constitutional law professor at Howard University, the First Amendment is a protection of individual liberties and freedoms, not an all clear to discriminate.
It seems to me that certain aspects of gender performance, quite honestly, would satisfy the basic requirement of sort of symbolic conduct, which means that it should be protected under the First Amendment, and the existing law, I think, cuts in favor of protecting that kind of performance.
We spoke to several religious perspectives to get their take on the issue. Jay Mace III is a queer poet and scholar on the Quran and the Bible, and he spoke with us about his experiences as a queer and trans religious individual.
But then I also found this thing called liberation theology. And so liberation theology, there's lots of different types of liberation theology, but around queerness, there's a school of thought that says, you know, if we were created, you know, as all people were, by this creator from the beginning, that means we're also in the text.
Dana Beyer is a trans woman running for the Maryland State Senate this year. As an active member in the Jewish community, she provides a unique perspective on the intersection of trans and religious spaces.
So there is an issue of freedom of religion. The question is, what does freedom of religion mean? You can believe whatever you want, but does that mean you can act out those beliefs in the public square? What's the public square? Does that include the business sphere? And that's where these battle lines get drawn.
Carrie Danner McDonald is a theology professor at Georgetown University, and we spoke to her about the Bible and how it can be interpreted in this context, as well as discriminatory attitudes in some heavily religious communities.
religious people's desire, good desire to try to be faithful to their commitment has to also be balanced with their duties as a citizen. And part of our duties as citizens is to engage in open conversation with those who don't agree with us. I found in my teaching that many times students who have not had direct contact with LGBTQ plus communities, or whose parents haven't, don't really understand the types of discrimination or identity or fear issues or actual levels of violence that these communities experience. So when they do, it can be a point of reflection and conversation as well.
Imam Talib is the well-spoken imam at the Nation's Mosque in D.C. We spoke with him about the Quran's attitude towards queer people and discrimination.
In Scripture, I don't find the people having been attacked. They were actually treated with respect. And obviously, when I see people being violent, I'm concerned because in Scripture, doesn't give me that.
Discrimination of any kind should not be permitted under the First Amendment or any part of the Constitution.
One thing to say that people don't like you, that politicians don't like you. It's another thing to say that not even God likes you.
We have, I think, an equally or perhaps more important constitutional imperative that requires us not to discriminate.
So these are spiritual matters. So I can't expect the concrete to always answer for me things of spiritual nature.
Ce parfum de nos années mortes, ce qui peut frapper à ta porte, l'infinité de destins, on nous pose un et qu'est-ce qu'on en retient?